Why would somebody feel ready for something they've never done? Like if you've never filmed a show or if you've never ridden a bike, like why would you actually feel ready? There's certain things you just have to make the leap. At some point, say, I'm ready to at least try and see what happens.
Not having a hard time reaching out to people or meeting people does not necessarily equate to having meaningful relationships. We need different pillars to support us, and one of which, a very important one, is our social connections and meaningful.
嗨，大家好，我是雪力。上次我非常有幸呢，邀请到这个365 Quotes to Live Your Life By 的作者，他叫做 Robledo 来到我的频道。那我看到这本书，我觉得非常有意思。第一个就是他也是组织心理学家，第二个就是我看到他的简介，发现说他在学组织心理学的时候，其实他陷入蛮严重的忧郁症。那在这过程中，他是怎么样把他自己拉出来的呢？跟这本书非常有关系。那其实他透过了看心理咨商，还有一些自己的努力走出来之后呢，他就发现说有7项事情呢是他悟到的。那这7样事情就是能够掌控的事情、正面积极的事、能做的事情、已经拥有的事情、此时此刻需要的事物，以及能给予他人的事物哦。这本书里面所有的格言其实都是符合这7个大标的哦。那大家知道我出了第2本书，就知道说看完书以后把它写下来，其实更能够让我们内化这个资讯，所以我也非常喜欢它的设计。我也开始每天写一句这里面的格言，我觉得像是做动禅一样，比较能够静下来。所以接下来呢，就跟大家分享我跟他的访谈。Welcome to my channel, Mr. Robledo, and congratulations on the success of your book.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
So your book is really very impactful. It's a treasure trove of inspiration. And I'd like to start by asking you, what motivated you to write this book?
Well, I wrote this book really to motivate people, to inspire them. But what happened originally was I had actually written a whole other book that's based around 7 key thoughts in people's lives to help them improve their lives. And to me, those ideas were so empowering, so powerful, and impactful personally in my own life that I wanted to find another way to get those ideas out there. And I just thought it might be a nice way to package those same ideas and get them out into the world even more through quotes. And I thought it would be sort of like a mantra that people could get into the same idea again and again. For example, one of the core ideas is focus on what you can control, not on what you can not control. There's about 50 or 60 quotes that all go around that idea. I've personally found in my life that I need repetition. You know, we'd like to think you just hear something once and then you apply it and everything goes well. But a lot of times you have to apply it, or you have to hear it many times, and then that allows you to apply it better. And then not only that, but you have to apply it many times as well to actually get it right, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish in your life. And so I've found that sort of repetition is very important. And I personally found these 7 key ideas so important and transformational. I thought there should be some quotes that just are focused on those themes. For example, I've noticed that there's other quote books out there. They might say there's 1,000 quotes to improve your life or something like that, but they're not often built around key themes that actually transformed somebody's life. So that's what I thought made this one different.
And your book helps people ground themselves and discipline themselves because you're asking people to write down, copy 1 quote per day to help them change their lives. My last book was also about asking people to write things down.
Oh, yeah.
But our approach is a little different because my last book was about me asking questions for people to ponder on and write down the answers. So that sort of stimulates their brain. But I have found that that takes way more commitment. I have so many people came up to me and said, yeah, those questions are great, but just not really motivated to sit down and write it out. So I found your approach so much easier for people to dive into. And that's probably why it was so impactful and changed so many people's lives. But before we go into that, I know I wrote my last book because I went through a lot of personal stuff. And for me to write my last book was really helping people like myself to overcome certain challenges in life. And so I wonder if that was the same for you, because for you to come up with the idea to want to transform your life, then it must have started off at some place that you felt that transformation was needed.
Yeah, there's definitely a personal journey or personal aspect to this book. It actually starts when I was in graduate school, where that was a very tough, difficult experience for me when I started there, because I was starting in a different state that I grew up in Indiana, and I was moving to Oklahoma. I didn't really know anybody there. In my first semester, towards the end, I actually ended up falling into a sort of depression. Well, it takes time to get into it, and then it takes time to get out of it. But so I ended up falling into that state. And at some point, I came to the realization that I sort of got myself into this state, into this problem, and maybe I could do something to get myself out of it. I wasn't really big on meditation at that time, but something made me realize that maybe I could enter a meditative state that would help clear my mind or get me to a better mental state. And so I did that. I entered a really deep meditation. I don't know what everyone's meditative experience is, but with me, after you get to half an hour or more, it feels like I've been in a chamber for days. Like it feels like I just went somewhere else. But so I did that, and I ended up having these sort of 7 key magical thoughts, or very impressionable thoughts, that came to me as sort of a very quick epiphany of thoughts. The funny thing was I didn't know where those thoughts had come from, really. I thought it was an example that was my own mind was telling me that I've been doing things wrong. For example, again, that first one, focus on what you can control, not on what you cannot control. They all have a component that says not, that's like, but don't do it this way.
Right.
I was really focused on just things that were taking my life out of control. Sure, there were outside circumstances of being in a new location, being in a difficult graduate school program, not really knowing anybody, but I've generally had a good life. I have a good family. I have a support system, even if they were not there specifically with me. So really, at the end of the day, I viewed it as something within me that I could improve. Again, I don't actually to this day know where exactly those thoughts came from, but something that I found very interesting after, because this happened like 15 years ago, actually. It's been quite a while since I had those flash of thoughts come to me. But something I found very interesting later, as I studied philosophy and other worldly ways of life, is that these thoughts are not at all new. But I found that even more powerful, actually, because I thought, well, other cultures and traditions and philosophies and self-development experts, or whatever different, ways of life and so forth, have found validity in these thoughts, even though I didn't come to it from a point of studying. I didn't go and, read all these thoughts in one specific place. So I found that quite impactful to see that, just to find that out many years later as I was studying on my own.
Right. When you were saying that, it made me think of Carl Jung's idea of collective consciousness, right?
Yeah.
It's almost like inner wisdom that we all share. We just need to meditate, or just really calm ourselves down and focus inward, and these wisdoms will come about.
Yeah.
So that's really fascinating. One thing I see you talked about is your depression. I'm fascinated by what you said. You said you got yourself into the situation, so you figured you could get yourself out of it. It's just a very interesting way of phrasing it, that you got yourself in depression. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I got myself into it, I believe, by focusing on the wrong thoughts. And one of the biggest keys there, which probably is not too surprising when it comes to something like depression, is I was over-focusing on negative thoughts. I never would say any of my books are specifically a depression cure, but at the same time, it's something that feeds into how I created these books, right? Because I went through that experience and I was looking for ways out of it.
Right.
But I think this book or other books I've written are useful for people who just want to improve, who maybe have had some negative thoughts. It doesn't necessarily have to be depression. But yeah, I think the way I got myself into the depression, there was a point where I didn't even realize how negative the mind was. Like it took me a lot of reflection to realize, wow, actually pretty much every thought going through my mind is negative, is expecting something bad to happen, is looking at the downside of the situation or the context, like limiting myself. And then that fit into the other thoughts that go into the book, like focus on what you can do. So, I was actually being negative and focusing on, oh, I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't talk to this person and tell them about what I'm going through because they're not going to want to help me or whatever. So it just became a downward spiral.
I completely hear you. And I think I went through bouts of depression on and off from 30 to 40 on. Looking back, obviously, I realized that I was focusing on things that I couldn't control, that I wanted but couldn't get.
Right.
And that thought sort of just amplified and took over my life, which is why I think this book is very helpful. Obviously, we don't want to say this is a cure for depression, but one of the techniques to pull myself, and I'm sure you had the same experience too, to pull ourselves out of it is to ground ourselves, right? I found that very helpful, like focusing on the here and now through meditation or writing things down. And so your book, essentially asking people to really sit down for maybe a few minutes a day, right? So let's not start big and think, I'm going to do 1 hour of meditation and study and whatnot. I think this is a good entry point for anyone who feels really out of control or upset. One of the things is we both suffer from depression at one point. Do you find that you still sort of catch yourself, going down the spiral every once in a while and then kind of catch yourself thinking, uh-oh, this is not good, or I got to do something right now? Does that still happen? I feel like a lot of people go through what we go through. So it would be great to share with them, like, what happens when you feel that way and how do you help yourself?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think everyone has their own different systems or approaches, but you're right. Like after you've gone through it, you don't ever want to fall back into it. So you definitely develop your systems and approaches to do better. I keep it simple. I like to go for walks almost every day. And I noticed that if I don't go for a walk for, a week or more, I don't really feel the best. Like I can get by, I can do fine with life and everything I have to do, but I don't feel at the best level. And for most people, I would say, of course, you can do any exercise that works for you. I just like to walk. I do like to meditate and continue with that. And that's something I would like to do better with, but even keeping it more simple than that. Yeah, it's something I'd like to do. I actually talked to a monk recently and he told me you should be meditating every day. He told me something very powerful. He said, you shower every day, right? Or every other day or whatever. You shower regularly. And then he said, well, you have to have a shower for your mind. You have to have something to cleanse your mind, to keep yourself more present and in control. And he said, you should be meditating every day. When a monk tells you this, it leaves quite an impact. I really value human connections. And I think most people know this, but there's a certain class of people who might be more like me, who tended to be a bit more of loners or have fewer close relationships. So for anybody like that, I would say, really cultivate your relationships, stay close to them, stay in contact with people. It might be difficult to make new friends, but try to make a new friend occasionally, get into a hobby. I really think that that's such an important thing. And I was even reading one of Kurt Vonnegut's books recently, and he said that we have to tap into our extended families more, that people are too isolated in their own close-knit, which I'm sure there's cultural differences. So he's talking more from the US perspective, but regardless, it's good to tap into your extended family. And if you don't really have one, because I'm from a Mexican Latino background, we have huge families. So if you don't have a huge extended family, then maybe you go out and you create one for yourself. And I'm really thinking of my friend Jamie So right now, who, well, I don't think he'd mind that I mention him. So he's a dear friend of mine, and he actually lost his parents, passed away in the past couple of years. But he was also kind of like me. He was kind of a loner, didn't really value that many close connections. He sort of got everything he needed from his family, from his parents. And so when they passed, he sort of realized then all of a sudden he needs to connect with people. I'm really proud of him because I think he's been doing really well. He connects with me. He connects with a few other people who he's been meeting, and he's just I think, working on his connections pretty much every day because he now perceives the total value of it. Sometimes we don't understand the full value of something until we no longer have it quite the way we used to.
Right.
But yeah, to answer your question, I think that I really do rely a lot on social connections and walking, meditation, even positive music or upbeat music. So there's many ways, and different people can find different things. Obviously, I think the positive quotes can play a role in that too.
I love that. You talked about you being more, the word you used was loner, but I was thinking, just from MBTI perspective, just more introverted, right? You're more introverted, and my viewers know that I'm very extroverted. But I think even being extroverted, you still want to cultivate meaningful relationships, right? Not having a hard time reaching out to people or meeting people does not necessarily equate to having meaningful relationships. So I do think you make a great point. We need different pillars to support us, and one of which, a very important one, is our social connections and meaningful, right? Positive social connections. And one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking about social connections, because in Asia, obviously, families tend to run large. So it's not hard to tap into your extended families, relatively speaking. But even if you don't have one, and I feel like the internet now sort of it's easier to form a support group or your own community on the internet. And speaking of that, I wanted to bring up someone's lives you've changed. I mean, clearly on the TikTok or internet, we can see that many people have quoted your book, but I did see this Oliver James, this TikToker who's become a motivational speaker. He talked about being illiterate and learning how to read as an adult and how your book helped him.
Yeah, as you said, he started to learn to read at 35 years old. I think it's such an interesting story because it shows it's never too late. A lot of people at 20 years old, if they haven't learned to read, they would think, well, I guess I'll never learn. But him at 35 years old, he finally fully realized that him not knowing how to read was holding him back in life. Though he could read some, he was functionally illiterate, so he couldn't read at a true adult level to get by in daily life.
Right.
And the interesting thing was his partner, I don't really know how, I suppose on Amazon, she found this book, the English original edition of the book, the 365 quotes to live your life by. And she thought this might make a great learning tool for Oliver to help him learn to read because the quotes are fairly simple, they're direct, and they're positive, so they can help him in his own life too.
Right.
He has over a dozen or so videos where he's reading the 365 quotes to live your life by.
Yeah.
And so glad that he blew up and became popular because that's sort of how I started to realize there was a certain point where there were so many sales and so much attention to the book coming in that I decided to Google and find why is this happening at that time.
Is that how you found out it was from him?
Yeah, because I just didn't know who he was until this sort of phenomena happened. And it got to the point where a lot of media outlets sort of discovered him at the same time. It's a very impressive story that he's learning to read at 35, pressing through and doing the work every day, which is not easy. You can tell that he struggles on his channel. It got to the point where he was on major media outlets like Good Morning America,
That's amazing.
The Rachel Ray Show, and quite a few others. So it was quite a journey for him, and I'm glad to have played a role in that with this book.
Absolutely. It must feel amazing to have changed somebody's life. And I was just thinking, I looked at his video and I'm thinking, oh, that's very unique situation, being illiterate, right, in your mid-30s. But then I thought, how is that any different from people who could read but aren't reading? Because I guess ever since smartphone and being able to watch Netflix on your smartphone, right, that consumes all of your free time. Right. So that story was very inspirational to me because, hey, I feel like it's time for people who haven't read to say, don't take this skill for granted. You're able to absorb all that information, right?
Yeah.
All that wisdom. And why don't we set aside some time? Let's start with your book, for example, 5 to 10 minutes a day and just get through one quote. That would be a great way to start being with yourself. And it's a
Right.
form of meditation too. And you have quotes from ancient philosophers, from actors, actresses, from motivational speakers, from people of all walks of life. Like, how
Absolutely.
long did it take you to gather all those quotes?
That's the interesting thing. It took many months actually, because I was very deliberate in looking for the right quotes from the right people.
Mhm.
The quotes that I believed in that had the message of the book that I thought was important. The 7 key thoughts, of course. Yeah.
Right. There are many quotes that I love, but one of the ones that really resonated with me was day 26. And it was a long quote by Eric Thomas. When you're willing to accept that you are the problem, you immediately become the solution. This is my favorite quote. And I think I try to say this and tell people that all the time because it's so easy for us to blame others. Do
Right.
you have a favorite quote in your book?
Yeah, I have it. It's the one by Hugh Laurie. He's an actor on
The
the TV show
house.
House. Yeah.
I
Which I
love
really,
him.
yeah, I really like him and the show. He says, it's a terrible thing, I think, in life to wait until you're ready. I have this
Mm,
feeling now that actually no one is ever ready to do anything. There's almost no such thing as ready. There's only now, and you may as well do it now. Generally speaking, now is as good a time as any. So the first time I read this quote, I was just astonished at how well he captured that idea because I'd never heard somebody mention it in quite that way about feeling ready. I've heard ideas kind of like that in other places, but he just captures it perfectly. The reason it really resonates with me is I'm somebody who pretty much never felt ready at anything, and I realized
right.
he's just so right.
I don't know if there's any connection, but when you talked about that quote, and I was thinking that's somewhat related to maybe us feeling depressed when we were younger. It's almost like imposter syndrome that I am not ready to be on this stage. I'm not ready for this phase of my life, or I'm not ready to be seen with the people that I'm with. And I think at work, every now and again, it still comes back. Like, are you ready for this? Are you good enough for this position? So I think there are some similarities to it. And yes, it's a very powerful quote. And I think it does capture that essence of you never think you're good enough. You never think you're ready. And life, it's not. Life, it's about the experience, right? Learning through this process and not being ready. And I remember when I started recording videos, the idea was proposed to me by my assistant during COVID. And I was like, well, no, I feel like I need to lose more weight. I feel like we need to get the equipment. I feel like we need to do more. And because of COVID, and I think it was a great perturbation. It's like, you know what? We're not doing anything. So might as well, jump in head first. And I don't know if I would have done it without COVID. So
Right.
sometimes we need the little push in our lives. But yeah, that's an amazing quote.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing to me with all that too is that it's sort of like logic. Why would somebody feel ready for something they've never done? Like if you've never
Exactly.
filmed a show or if you've never ridden a bike, like why would you actually feel ready? There's certain things you just have to make the leap. At some point, say, I'm ready to at least try and see what happens.
Right, right. So that's great. How can you be ready when you've never done it? Right? No,
Yeah.
that's great. I did want to ask you one last question before we go, is that you've had such a huge success with this book. Has that changed your life, or have you had challenges since that success? Just any major changes that came after the success of this book?
Basically, there will always be some form of a challenge. You might not be surprised to see that my perspective on challenges is that really we should learn to see the positive and the good in them because I've learned to see them as a blessing. As with anybody in anybody's life, I think there's a point where you face so many different challenges, but you have to be willing to see them not necessarily as a bad thing, but you could see them as a test or a way to better yourself, to improve. Because if you're not challenged, then sometimes you just gradually become too complacent or you
Right.
fail in your abilities. You're just not tested and challenged enough. So
Right. Right.
I view it as a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wanted to ask this because I didn't set out to become that. Obviously, I still consult for businesses, and I sort of had the YouTube and writing as my side gig. But after my book and my channel, sort of people look at me as sort of an inspirational speaker of sorts. And I never really set out to identify myself as that way. Like I'm sharing my previous experiences and how to apply psychology in everyday life. But as I've gained momentum or had more subscribers, and I think that was a challenge that I started to face because you become a semi-public figure and people look to you to say, hey, your book or your video has really inspired me. So you must be doing well all the time. Like you must be mentally sound, right? Or very healthy to be this kind of public figure or mentor to people. And I actually, when I first realized that, it became sort of a pressure of its own, like unexpected pressure. So it was very interesting to see if you have encountered something similar. Hey, this is inspirational. So you must know how to inspire yourself, or like you don't go through bouts
I
of
relate
pressure.
to that a lot in terms of the pressure, but I really don't see it in a bad way at all. First of all, I understand that really it's pressure from myself. It's not really, nobody else is really pressuring me to elevate myself, but I do perceive some form of pressure to be at the top of my game in terms of self-development, in terms of positive thinking, in terms of facing the challenges head on, in terms of being able and ready to listen to somebody else and what they're going through and help them. And it's not a regular schedule of, I'm going to help 1, 2, 3, or A, B, and C persons every day. Things just happen in life where somebody could use some advice or they need something. And I do aim to be there for those situations. I really do perceive that pressure. Obviously, too much pressure can be a bad thing and be stressful.
Right.
But I personally perceive those pressures as a good thing. And I remind myself that my personal development or my personal well-being isn't just about me. There's other people who I can help along the way, and I'm not going to be able to help them appropriately if I'm personally not doing well.
Right.
And I do regularly find myself there for family members, for different people in life who that's just the way it is. In my field, if I've written all these books on personal development, on elevating the mind, elevating yourself, I think it's pretty important that I know how to do it for myself. I think that's always something that I should aim to do. And then, of course, from there, I know how to help others with that as well. But if the challenge arises where I feel like I'm sinking a little bit or falling, I don't judge myself too much for that. I just say, well, here's a chance to learn something new, to figure out a way through so that I could advise the next person who faces that.
That's wonderful. And I love what you said. And it's a reminder, right? No matter how healthy or how well we think we're doing, we're going to face different challenges. It's almost like, okay, you've hit this. Now you're ready for the next level, for the next challenge. And we're never short of challenges. It's how we view them. Hey, did I understand this right? You said you had some connections with Taiwan?
Yeah, I visited Taiwan. My sister-in-law was married there. Yeah, many years ago, I had the privilege and the chance to visit Taiwan, and it was amazing. I'm glad you asked because I did want to mention that it might sound silly, but one of my favorite things was the noodles there, the food, the noodles. I was just blown away. I was like, you can't find noodles like this in the U.S.
Yeah, well, we're known for our beef noodles, so
Yeah,
hopefully you get to come again to promote your book. I could
yeah.
take you out for beef noodles.
Oh, yeah, that would be wonderful. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Isaac.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.